Mark's Gospel in Context. Here's today's questions. We are in Mark chapter 15. We made it to chapter 15, this chapter and one more. And then we're done with the book of Mark. Mark chapter 15, verses 1 through 15. Here's the questions. Why they chose an insurrectionist over the truth. And we see this happen when Pilate offers them Barabbas. We're going to be taking a look at that passage today. Why they were so jealous of Jesus. And of course, did Jesus and politics ever mix? And we'll talk about the mix of the church and the sword and see how well that works out for everybody. Let's take a look at it. Chapter 15, this chapter opens with the decision of the Sanhedrin to send Jesus to Pilate. So at the end of chapter 14, we saw that Jesus was standing before the Sanhedrin. Previously, he had been to Annas, and now he was with Caiaphas, and they had made the decision that he was guilty of blasphemy. But they cannot enforce a blasphemy charge against Jesus. They cannot put Jesus to death for blasphemy. The fact that they are under Roman control says you can't put anybody to death. So they're going to send him to Pilate, and they don't send him on a charge of blasphemy. They send him on a charge of treason. So let's take a look at what the verses actually say. As soon as it was morning, the chief priest held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You say so." Then the chief priest accused him of many things. Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further reply, so that Pilate was amazed. So a couple of things here. Okay, the Sanhedrin could not condemn Jesus to death. If they had executed him, it would have been a stoning in private. If they were capable, if they had went ahead and carried out the charge of blasphemy and put him to death, they would have had to take him someplace privately and stone him. But they didn't want that. They wanted a full-fledged public execution to discredit him because they were jealous of him. They wanted to fully show everybody this guy's a criminal. They wanted to make him look bad in front of the general public because it was the general public who were really supporting Jesus. This is why they never came to arrest him in public. This is why they stopped confronting him in public, because every time they did, the crowd was on Jesus' side. They were all amazed and marveled at him. So they need to discredit him. So no private stoning. We want a full-fledged execution in front of everybody. The Sanhedrin convicted Jesus on charges of blasphemy, but they brought Jesus to Pilate on a charge of treason. They turned to Pilate and said, "He's proclaiming himself king of the Jews," which means that he's speaking against Caesar. For Caesar's our ruler, so he's an insurrectionist, like the other ones. Now, let's just put it this way. Rome had a problem with insurrection. This might surprise you, but did you know conquered people don't like to be conquered? If you go in and you take somebody's homeland, they want it back. That if you go, okay, and you have to think about Rome for a second. How big their empire truly was, because it went all the way from Hadrian's Wall in Scotland all the way to the Khyber Pass in India. It encompassed a huge area. Okay? And every time they conquered an area, they, of course, would take soldiers from that area and move them to someplace else. So one, they weren't left behind to fight for their own homeland, so their soldiers weren't very happy people. That's why they had such strict laws about soldiers. If a soldier broke formation, they were put to death. Okay. So, they have all these conquered people. Rome didn't get it. Rome didn't understand. You ever notice the oppressor never understands? Because Rome is thinking this way. They're like, well, we don't understand. We brought them, this great empire. We built them roads. We gave them aqueducts. We created the arch, for heaven's sakes. How cool is that? Not only that, but we gave them the right gods. We brought our gods with us. We taught them how to, worship our gods. We have Caesar. We gave them all that is glorious about Rome, and they don't like us. I do not understand this. So they were constantly fighting against insurrections. And let's just say that the area occupied by the Jewish people was famous for insurrections. In fact, amongst the Jewish people, one of the groups were the Zealots, and they were big on, let's overthrow Rome. Judas Iscariot was one of those Zealots, and he wanted to overthrow Rome. And on occasions, there would be insurrections, and they would attack Roman soldiers. And then, of course, the people, the rulers had to put them down. So they brought Jesus to Pilate on a charge of treason, very serious charge. This is something they could have him executed for. Roman courts convened at dawn. That's why it says, as soon as it was morning. As soon as it was morning, because this is when the Roman courts started, at dawn. As soon as the sun comes up, let's get this business out of the way. Unlike the Sanhedrin, that required 2 witnesses to agree, Pilate, who was the magistrate, would determine Jesus' guilt through questioning. You didn't have to have any witnesses whatsoever. He would just question you. And he would question the people who were bringing the charges against you. And so he asked that very important question, are you the king of the Jews? Right? He's amazed that Jesus doesn't try to defend himself. And this, of course, echoes Isaiah chapter 51, the passage of the suffering servant, that he stands silent before his accusers. So he's kind of amazed. Okay, why aren't you answering all these charges? Don't you know how this court system works? But he asked him, are you the king of the Jews? The question Pilate asked indicates the charges the Sanhedrin brought. Treason. He proclaims himself the king. He's against the Roman government. He's against Caesar. He's against you. You're the ruler of this area, not him. And when Jesus does answer, unfortunately, I got to tell you, translation is a tricky business. Being a translator or being an interpreter, it's a tricky business. Because when you look at the Greek of this, it's really ambiguous. It can mean different things. Okay? On the one hand, it can mean, that's what you say. You're the one saying it, not me. That could be one translation. Or it could be, you said it, that's true. So we're not sure which answer Jesus gave because unfortunately the Greek's a little ambiguous there. But either way, it's not a good answer. It's not one that's going to get him off the hook. But it does leave everything, all the responsibility for what's going to happen next, on the shoulders of Pilate. He'll be the one who decides whether or not Jesus lives or dies. Now, the verses continue. Now at the festival, he used to release a prisoner for them, anyone for whom they asked. Now a man called Barabbas, okay, that would have been his surname, Barabbas. Okay, Bar for son of, so this would have been son of Abbas. We don't know what his first name was. There's some weird legends out there about what his first name was. Just kind of ignore them because we don't have any historical support for him. But a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So there had been an insurrection recently. And one of the people they caught was Barabbas. He's an actual insurrectionist. He's guilty of treason. He's scheduled to be executed. So Pilate's like, so who do you want? You want Jesus? Or do you want this actual insurrectionist over here? I think it's Pilate antagonizing the Jewish leaders. Pilate did not have a good working relationship with the Jewish leaders. In fact, Pilate would eventually be removed from his post because of all the complaints the Jewish leaders would send up to Caesar. He did not have a good working relationship with them. He was known as a political animal. He was known to be very cruel. And when he put down an insurrection, he really put it down. It was usually a bloodbath. He did not have a good working relationship. So he's like, here's a guy you're accusing of treason, and here's somebody who's actually guilty of treason. Which one do you want? So the crowd came and began to ask Pilate to do for them according to his custom. Then he answered them, do you want me to release you, the king of the Jews? For he realized it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. This is him antagonizing the religious leaders. He knew it. He knew the only reason this guy was standing before him was not because he was treasonous, but because the religious leaders were jealous of him. That he threatened their power. He threatened their influence. that the crowds liked him better than they liked the religious leaders. And so he's like, I know what's going on here. So he's like, okay, well, which one do you want? But the chief priests stirred up the crowds to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Most likely they brought their own servants, they brought the temple guards, they brought a whole bunch of people, probably spread them out in the crowd, got everybody whipped up. Let's have Barabbas. Pilate spoke to them again. Then what do you wish me to do with the man you call the King of the Jews? And they shouted back, crucify him. Pilate asked him, and this is definitely antagonistic, what evil has he done? What evil has he done? So he's kind of poking at the Jewish religious leaders there. You know, some people, this is kind of one of those weird things, some people believe that Pontius Pilate somehow believed Jesus, was so impressed with him, became a supporter of him, later became a follower of him. If you belong to the Eastern Orthodox Church, he's actually one of the saints. Okay, I don't think so, especially with his actions afterwards. You know, even after this whole Jesus incident, there were things that he did that were very, let's just say, a follower of Jesus would not do. Okay? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, crucify him. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them. After flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. And of course, in the other Gospels, you're going to get a lot more details. Okay, there's other stories that continue along on this. But again, Mark wants to focus on Jesus and how Jesus reacts to all of this. Barabbas and Jesus create another contrast. Remember the contrast of Jesus and Peter? Here's another contrast, right? Because now we have Barabbas, who is guilty of treason. He gets freed. The world, the oppressive governments, will always side with those who are guilty. Jesus is accused of treason. He's completely innocent, and yet he is condemned. As I pointed out in previous sermons in the book of Mark, that's that scapegoat mechanism. We've got to find somebody to pin this on. We've got to act out our violence on this person so that we can get everybody calm. This is how we keep crowds calm. This is how we keep crowds and mobs. This is how we keep the mobs subdued. We offer them a sacrificial victim to act their violence out on. And it's always the innocent one. We just pin the blame on them. We can see that in our society today, can't we? Because we know that everything that's evil in society today is all due to the fact that drag queens are reading children's stories in libraries. I don't think so. But we have to find some kind of innocent victim to pin the blame on. And eventually we'll act out our violence on them. Pilate was a cruel ruler. Like I said, when he put down an insurrection, he really put it down in a very bloody manner. And so when he asks what evil has he done, he's not following Jesus. He doesn't think Jesus is innocent. He doesn't care. He doesn't care whether Jesus is innocent or guilty. That's not his problem. His problem, he's got to make sure that he doesn't have another insurrection on his hands. He's got to keep everybody happy. What he's really doing is kind of poking at the Jewish leaders. Yeah, so what has he really done? You know, you come to me and I have to solve this problem for you. So he's just kind of giving them a hard time. Okay, he knows they only want Jesus killed because of their envy. And as I said, Jesus and the Jewish leaders did not have a good working relationship. How did Pontius Pilate get into the position that he was in? Well, it all goes back to Herod. All goes back to Herod the Great. If you remember, in some of the Gospels, you'll read that Herod the Great was the ruler over all of Judea at the time that Jesus was born. And it's Herod the Great who calls out for the children to be slaughtered. When Herod the Great dies, there's so much infighting amongst his relatives over who gets what, that they literally take his territory and split it into 4 parts. And each of these 4 parts is taken over by one of his sons. They become known as tetrarchs. Tetra for 4, arch for ruler. Each one rules over 1/4 of what Herod had ruled over. Unfortunately, One of those sons was so bad at governing that Caesar removed him and sent Pontius Pilate in his place. This is why he didn't get along with the other Jewish rulers, all the 3 other Herods. He didn't get along with them at all. He didn't get along with the Sanhedrin. He didn't get along with anybody. In fact, being sent to this place where he was sent was probably seen as a form of punishment. That Caesar probably didn't really like him very much. That he wasn't a very good ruler. He got sent to this kind of backwater town where nothing happens. It's not a really good place for his political career. He's not really going to climb the ladder being stuck here. So he was probably a little angry about this too. But he was a very cruel ruler. And he was trying to please the crowd. He's a politician and he gives in to the mob. Have we seen that happen? Have we seen our politicians who do what the mob asks instead of doing what's right? So knowing this is the political situation, I want you to picture this, because as I've seen many a time, Jesus was not executed by law and order. He was executed by the religious leaders who married themselves to political power, and that's always a bad combination. This is why I speak out so strongly against Christian nationalism. I know where Christian nationalism comes from. It comes from the South. It comes from the segregationist movement. And you can call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, it's nothing more than white supremacy. And I find it very strange that a bunch of white supremacists co-opt a Middle Eastern rabbi as their mascot to use him for their own goals. So hearing all this, okay, both the religious and political authorities see Jesus as a threat to their power and position. The Sanhedrin sees him as a threat. The chief priests and the elders and the scribes see him as a threat because the mob, the people, are on his side. They follow his teaching. He's got a whole new way of looking at the world that threatens their way of life. And they're making money off of it too. Remember Caiaphas and his beautiful mansion? And his father-in-law with his beautiful mansion? It's not pretty. So they're threatening that way of life. And of course, Pilate is thinking, well, he's a threat to me. I don't care if he's guilty or innocent, he's causing problems. If I get another insurrection on my hand, that's not going to look good on my record, and I'll be stuck here even longer. So let's just get rid of him. He's a threat. Anytime you speak truth to power, you are a threat. And they will do everything they can to get rid of you. Religion, backed by the power of the sword, has always been a danger to those who question. Now, my Christian nationalist brothers and sisters will say there's no such thing as a separation of church and state. Oh yeah, there is. There is. And it's there for a very specific reason. They saw what the Puritans did to those who disagreed with them. And they're like, we don't want this happening all over the colonies. We don't want the church taking over the government. You know, you hear all these weird stories. Thank you very much, pseudo-historian David Barton, who lies through his teeth about what history actually is. Oh, did I say that out loud? Sorry. Who tells you, well, you know, all our founding fathers were Christians. No, they weren't. Benjamin Franklin was an atheist. Well, I mean, all the rest, Jefferson was a Christian. No, Jefferson was a deist. If you ran into him, you wouldn't call him a Christian. He admired Jesus. Well, he had Bibles published. That shows he was a Christian. No, he published the Jefferson Bible. You ever seen a Jefferson Bible? How many people have ever seen or read a Jefferson Bible? I have a copy of it. I've read it. You know what it is? It's only the teaching of Jesus from the New Testament, because he didn't believe Jesus was God. He removed all supernatural elements. So you tell me he's a Christian when he doesn't believe that Jesus is God. That's sort of like the defining mark, isn't it? It's like, oops. And you go through all these people who signed the Constitution, signed the Declaration of Independence, did all that kind of stuff. They're all deists. They were all rationalists. They weren't Christians. They weren't out to form a Christian nation. When they referred to God, they meant providence, some kind of spirit that led things in a certain direction. They were deists. They weren't Christians. And so despite what my Christian nationalist brothers and sisters say, we weren't a Christian nation founded by Christians, meant to be. We were founded by deists and rationalists who wanted a nation that was separate from the church, because they knew that when the church and the government get together and the government has the power of the sword to enforce things, it's a bad combination. Hello, the Crusades. Hello, Calvin's Geneva. It's not pretty. Jesus, as the suffering servant, shows a new way to deal with injustice. Jesus didn't come as the conquering king. He came as the suffering servant, and he showed us how to deal with injustice by not playing the game. Jesus had no answer for them. I'm not going to play your game. You're going to do to me what you're going to do to me, no matter what I say. You'll fire questions at me and ask me all kinds of stuff until you can find something that you can condemn me with. You know what? You've already decided to condemn me. You're just going to have to do it on your own. You're going to have to take responsibility for it. And by being the suffering servant, his nonviolence exposes the cruel, violent injustice of corrupt leadership. And two people have picked up that mantle and changed governments, changed the world. We saw Gandhi do it in India and help topple the British Empire. We saw Martin Luther King Jr. do it here in the United States. And changed a lot of people's minds because he exposed the racism and the bigotry and the ugliness and the cruelty of what was going on. And the fact that he wasn't attacking back left his hands clean. He exposed how cruel and violent and injustice the court systems were, the government was. He opened our eyes. This is the route that Jesus wants us to take, and it's not an easy route to take. I love my Christian nationalist brothers and sisters because they say things to me, it says in the Bible, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. When Jesus comes back, everybody's going to have to get on their knees. Everybody's going to have to confess. I always like to ask him, where's that in the Bible? I think it's in Revelation. No, it's in Philippians. Philippians chapter 2, verses 10 and 11. In fact, you cut out a whole bunch of other stuff. But that's okay. I don't mind. By the way, did you know in the Greek, this is one of those things, being a translator is tricky. We sometimes put things in there that or we eliminate things that should be in there. The actual verse reads, and if you go back to 8 and 9, it talks about how Jesus humbled himself and then God exalted him so that when he returns, every knee shall, and there's a little Greek word in there that I keep forgetting to put in, gladly kneel. And every tongue shall gladly confess. There's no force involved because they see that this is the better way. They see that this is the right way. Their eyes have been opened. Dare I say it, they are woke. Let me say this again, for everybody who might want to put some criticism down there about my using that word woke. What do I think the word woke means? I have a very simple definition for the word woke. It's anything that upsets the KKK. That's being woke. Yeah? Okay. Right? Anyway, where was I? But people will gladly kneel. People will gladly confess because their eyes have been opened. There's no force involved. Jesus doesn't come with the power of the sword because he doesn't need it. Because we will willingly follow him because we know it's the right way. As Christians, we must speak truth to power. And my Christian nationalist brothers and sisters are seeking to become power. They're not speaking truth to empire, they're trying to become empire. And that's a bad combination every time. That is not what we're called to do. We are not called to become another version of empire. We're called to follow Jesus and get everybody to follow along with us, to get us all moving in one direction toward Christ. We weren't called to build great cathedrals. We weren't called to, show everybody the prosperous gospel of how you can make millions if you just give all your money to God. We weren't called to do all that nonsense. We were called to just, by example, following Jesus, showing that this is the right way. This is the path to the blessedness. Come along. You can be blessed too. Come with us. That's what we were called to do. We must never use violence. The moment you use violence, you have stopped following Jesus. We must never use violence. Anyone who uses violence, you're not following Jesus. You're just an insurrectionist trying to overthrow one empire to replace it with your own. And it'll be just as corrupt as the previous one. We must not lie and slander. I get tired of listening to people behind the pulpit, pastors behind the pulpit, preachers, and so-called prophets behind the pulpit who lie and slander about people they see as their enemy. When you have to lie and slander, you're not following Jesus. You're not even following the Old Testament God. You broke one of the top 10. You know that thing that you keep trying to put everywhere that we're like going, no, you can't put it there. It's government property. You're breaking that one. About not bearing false witness. We can't lie and slander and claim to be following Jesus. And yet, we have all these supposedly good Christian people. You know they're good Christian people because they're wearing, flags, flag jackets, and big gold crosses, and got a big fish symbol on their car. Supposedly they're Christian, and they're lying and slandering like crazy. They use God's name in vain to promote their own causes. The ends do not justify the means. And how many times have I heard this? Well, yeah, we're doing this, but ultimately, we'll build a Christian kingdom by doing this. No, you're going to build a corrupt kingdom with a false form of Christianity. That would be called false religion. A lot of you are just false prophets, leading the people astray. I have an interesting question for you. Listen to the politicians who use God, who use Jesus, who use the Bible or Christianity to convince you to do something. Like hate your neighbor. How many of these people use the name of God or Jesus or the Bible or Christianity to convince you that you need to vote a certain way that's going to harm your neighbor? Now, normally I don't like to mention politicians, but I'll do it. Donald J. Trump, candidate for president, just stood up and said one of the things he's going to do is remove all protections for LGBTQ students in schools. That exposes them to harm. Love does no harm. And if he does something that's going to harm students because of who they are, even if he thinks it's sinful, he's not loving them. Listen to them when they try to convince you of these things. If their rhetoric is violent, I'm getting tired of preachers and prophets standing behind pulpits calling for the death of different individuals who are praying against people going, oh God, smite them. God's not in the smiting business. God is a redeemer and a healer. if they demonize other, if they demonstrate an unrepentant, sinful character. I was just reading this morning, Benny Hinn. Oh, am I going to go there? Yeah, I'm going to go there. Let me go there. His ministry has been asking a documentary maker who has a 4-hour documentary on him on YouTube right now, please take that down, please take that down, please take that down. Makes poor Benny look bad. One of the worst parts is he did this big apology about, I'm so sorry about my fundraising techniques, the things I told you, that if you give to this ministry, God will give you 100 times back, blah, 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 blah. He made this huge apology how he's not going to do that anymore. 4 months later, when donations dropped, he started doing it again. Unrepentant. See, being repentant not only means saying you're sorry, but changing your behavior and setting things right. What did he do to set things right? He conned millions. Did he send the money back? No, completely unrepentant. People who speak that way need to be rejected. At what price, I have to ask you, was the Christians' right victory in overturning Roe v. Wade? They accomplished the end. They had been trying to do it for 50 years, and they accomplished it finally. But at what price did they pay? How many lies did they have to tell? How many people did they have to harm? How badly has the Christian right, how badly has the church been tainted by jumping in bed with the political right to accomplish this? The ends did not justify the means. The church and politics don't mix, they shouldn't be together. And it's sad that sometimes political means are the only ways available to us to help protect all people. It shouldn't be that way. And the church should be the safest place for anyone to go to, and it's not, because it's become tainted. Now, if you want my opinion about Roe v. Wade, we have videos on that. You can look up my video on abortion. I'm of the mindset that we could make abortion unnecessary. We don't need to make it illegal. We can make it unnecessary. The Netherlands has been the leader in this. They have found that by giving information about birth control and reproduction, education, starting at the youngest ages and raising them up that way, that by giving free access to birth control and by funding women's health, that the teen pregnancy rate and the abortion rate plummets. They have the lowest teen pregnancy rate and the lowest abortion rate of any country in the world. How do they do it? Sex education, access to birth control, and funding women's health. So that abortion in the Netherlands is almost completely unnecessary. Almost completely unnecessary. Compare that to the United States, who has a high rate. They block sex education in the schools constantly. They certainly don't want you having, access to birth control. Now that they've overturned Roe v. Wade, they're talking about, well, let's look at all these let's see if we can restrict access to birth control, and they continually defund women's health. Family planning does more than abortions. They do a lot of women's health issues, and they defund those constantly. In other words, they're doing everything they can to increase the need for abortions, to increase teen pregnancy. And they're like, let's make it illegal. That doesn't help. Ladies, please save us. Ladies, please. Please rise up against this. Please vote. Because the guys have totally blown it. Did their political tactics taint the church? I say yes. Yes, they did. When the church started acting like a branch of the political right, they tainted themselves. And that's why we have the rise of the nuns and the duns and all the rest of them. The Barna Group put out a book called Unchristian, and they found 6 things that are causing people to leave the church. Number 2, politics. Did their dirty politics destroy the church's Christian witness? When you can't tell the difference between a pastor and a dirty politician, you got a problem. When they're speaking the same lies, when they're slandering the same people, when they're demonizing the same people, there's a problem. Would Jesus have done what they did? What would Jesus do? Not that. He would have nonviolently exposed them for what they are and allowed God to justify him through the power of resurrection. How do we know that Jesus' way is the right way? Because he's a living Savior today. If his way was not the right way, he'd still be in the grave. Or would Jesus have changed the hearts of people instead of the laws of government? Think about that. With that, let me close in prayer. Lord Jesus, we just come before you today. We ask for a change in our hearts. Help us to follow you. Help us to walk your path of nonviolence and to be brave enough to speak truth to power and to stand against the corruption that has entered our own house. Lord, your church has been tainted. Help us to sweep it clean, no matter the cost to ourselves personally. We just pray these things in your name. Amen. Well, once again, if you found today's content helpful or you'd like to disagree with me and write some go ahead. Right? Be sure to subscribe to our channel, like us, share this video, or leave us a comment. It helps the community as well as our YouTube channel. So we thank you so much for all of those who have made it here to the end. Thank you for everybody who's here in person. It's so good to see you all. Let me close with this bit of, you know what? I just can't help myself. That's my biggest problem is, I get all worked up, right? I get this stuff. I just have to, this is why I don't have an ulcer. Right? Because I'm just like, out it goes, right? I don't hold this stuff inside. Okay. Noted theologian, Marjorie Taylor Greene, wanted to remind all of us that it was the Jews who killed Jesus. So I would like to correct her as a fellow theologian and just point out that it was not the Jews who killed Jesus. It was the combination of religion and politics. Yeah. I better close with this benediction before I get myself in trouble. As you leave this place, consider how you can speak truth to power. God bless you all. Go in peace. You are dismissed. Thank you.
We are one in Christ, we are one in God, we are one in unity. We are one in truth, we are one in